Hey, church leaders, welcome to the Slingshot Group podcast. I'm your host, Tim Foote, CEO of Slingshot Group, where we help you build remarkable teams and healthy culture through staffing and coaching. And my conversation today is what the Slingshot Group podcast is all about. We know as leaders, you've got a lot going on, and what you listen to needs to help equip you for what you do and how you lead. We know it needs to help you build your remarkable team and develop healthy culture. And so my guest today is Brad Lomenick. Brad is a leadership consultant. He's a speaker. He's a curator of content, a gatherer of leaders, and he's author of H3 Leadership and The Catalyst Leader. And to give you a sense of some of the things we'll dig into today, we're going to talk about this concept of quiet quitting and hustle culture. We're going to explore why ministry leaders are leaving ministry. We're also going to talk about how we need to innovate in this cultural moment as leaders and how to raise up younger leaders and lead them well. So let's jump into my conversation. Well, hey, Brad, it is great to have you on the podcast today. This is a conversation I've been wanting to have for a long time because we've orbited so many of the same people, and I'm glad to have it today and just hit record.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, we feel like we've connected, but we haven't connected. We run in the same circles.
Absolutely. And I've seen the impact that you have had on so many of the leaders that we've gotten to work with and to work with their teams. So thank you for the work that you're doing. And people would know you as a speaker, an author, a thought leader, a gatherer of people, a curator of content, an entrepreneur.
Keep going.
Tell me.
Keep going,
there
man.
You go. There's some things they might know about you, though, is that you are like in a rap band. We could talk about that for a while, but I'm not going to. I'm going to talk about the fact that you wrangled horses in the mountains of Colorado. Can you talk about that for a few moments?
Yeah, classic sort of summer job like a lot of us had in college, and didn't know what I was doing, and then went back and was going to spend sort of a 6-month window working on this amazing guest ranch in Colorado before going back to law school.
Right.
And ended up staying for almost 5 years. And I had to turn into, somebody who actually knew what they were doing. So it was an amazing experience in my early 20s, lots of lessons learned, lots of work ethic, lots of, understanding how to connect with people, hospitality. I mean, arguably, Tim, I would say one of the great lessons for any leader is to understand how to host people. And when you're a 5-diamond guest ranch, you better figure out what hospitality looks like. And Absolutely. So it was a crash course for me, and really like meeting the expectations of guests. So great experience.
And Colorado for the win, Brad, because I came nearly 21 years ago and didn't think I'd be still here 21 years later. It's still home base for me, Denver area. Beautiful.
Incredible.
And yeah, absolutely. And then you talked about obviously wrangling horses and hospitality, but I think we could do a whole other podcast episode on what you learned about teams and teamwork through wrangling horses, because we're obviously students of teams.
Oh my gosh. Well, again, I was a knucklehead in my early 20s trying to figure out sort of my own rules and expectations and I would say framework for leading people. And there was a lot of things I did wrong. That's for sure. But yes, there are many lessons from not just the teamwork of working on a guest ranch with a bunch of just recent college graduates on your team, but also then when you throw in horses, it creates an interesting mix of many times dysfunction and chaos.
I can't imagine. What do they say? Don't work with kids or animals. You kind of got college kids, and you got it all there. Well, another one too, Brad, that people won't know about you is you played American football in Australia and New Zealand. Please tell me more.
Yes. Well, classic case of a bunch of high school seniors graduating from the state of Oklahoma, going on a tour to exhibit American football in especially in Sydney and in Auckland, most people weren't interested. I'll just say that, we had a great time. I mean, we enjoyed ourselves. There was about 80 of us from all over the state of Oklahoma who were pretty good football players in our high school days. But it was an incredible travel experience, first of all, because I didn't really care about the the football was nice, but to get to none of us had ever been obviously to Australia or New Zealand. I don't think anybody on the trip had. So and most of us had never been on a plane before, or at least hadn't flown for more than a couple of hours. So to get that kind of experience at 18 globally, to see, two amazing countries, several amazing cities. We stopped in Honolulu and actually played the California All-Star team. And, so just amazing experiences at that stage of life.
I'm going to arrogantly assume that Sydney was your favorite city.
No question. Yes. We did stay right down there on King's Cross Street, which we didn't know, but everybody else knew that this is like the place you don't want to stay.
Darlinghurst Road, King's Cross, for the Australians that are listening.
a bunch of 18-year-old knuckleheads from Oklahoma
can get in some trouble.
One kid went out and he was wearing a leather jacket, and he went out by himself because they told us, hey, just go out in packs. And he went out by himself, and I think somebody stole his jacket, and we all thought, okay, this is real. Like this, we're not in Tulsa anymore. And I don't know why they stole his leather jacket, but yeah, it was an eye-opening experience for many of us.
Oh, I'm sure. And I've got so many follow-up questions that I'm not going to ask. As leaders, where are some of our experiences, Brad? What are the key experiences that influence what you're doing now?
Yeah. Gosh, there's so many, right? How many do you want me to list? I guess that's the question.
Top one. Give me your top three.
Well, connecting with John Maxwell for me in my mid-20s was definitely like one of those catalyst moments, no pun intended. But I got connected to his team, and I was actually I transitioned out of this guest ranch experience in Colorado, was working for a boutique consulting firm, which that's another one for me, which I met these guys, Steve Graves and Tom Addington. Shout out to both Steve and Tom. I went and worked for them after being a head wrangler, and I learned sort of management consulting and started to understand how to carry the scriptures in one hand and the Fast Company or Harvard Business Review or Wall Street Journal in the other, and to be like proficient at both. But meeting John Maxwell after that, and then we, out of that, there was Catalyst that was launched, and a bunch of experiences that really gave me the runway for leadership development, for playing in the leadership sandbox. So those two people in my 20s, or those three people, Steve Graves, Tom Addington, John Maxwell, paramount for me. There was another gentleman, I'll mention Tim, and you may even know, but Bill Hendricks, early days for me, again, just had sort of gotten done with the head wrangling world, and Bill Hendricks, who's one of Howard Hendricks' sons, took me through, I don't even remember the name of the life plan experience. And this was pre me knowing Pete Richardson. Otherwise I'd have probably had Pete do my life plan. Right. But, to have that experience of then being able to look at life and say, I feel like there's somewhat of a runway here that I'm not sure what exactly is going to be on the runway yet, but I know there's a runway and I want to be strategic about it. Those things were paramount in my 20s. And my theory always is work on your who, not your what in your 20s. And I mean, like, not just who you are, but who you're around. And if you get around the right who's, all the what stuff takes care of itself.
Right.
And that, again, that's been true for me, man. Every season of life, it's been more about the who than the what.
It's interesting, Brad, as you're talking about that, I'm listening the who's in my mind that have influenced my what's, and there've been so many, especially when you look back. It's good to take stock of that kind of thing. And
Absolutely.
part of your journey has been writing, obviously, your amazing book, H3 Leadership. And you say in the book that the three of the most important questions every influencer must ask is, who am I? Humble. Where do I want to go? It's the hungry. And then the hustle. How will I get there? How have these questions shaped you, and why are they so important for every leader to answer?
Well, those three words for me have been, I would say, the three legs of my leadership stool. The humble, hungry, hustle. I mean, it was a framework before it was a book title. You know, not that it's bad if somebody creates a book title that becomes their framework, but for me, it was the thing when I was leading Catalyst over all those years, when the interns would come in and they wanted to change the world and they wanted my job, and great. I love your energy and, you know, your desire to make a difference. And they would say, okay, just break it down. Like, how do I win here? And my answer was, be humble, stay hungry, always hustle. Like those three, because I think what happens with those three words is they really balance each other out, you know. And I've been around, Tim, I'm sure you know lots of leaders that have tons of humility, but zero hustle. So they got the mindset right, but they don't do anything. And then you get around leaders who have tons of hustle with no humility. Right. And so they're willing to make things happen, but it's all about them. And, you know, then you get this hunger piece that's sort of the connection point in the middle. And so those have been, again, my mantra, and they always will be in my life. If I'm going to try to have three legs of the stool, humble, hungry, hustle are the ones that I want to sort of build my framework, my mindset, my, you know, sort of the habits that I have in place. I want to build them around those three. And we can dive into those three more if you want, but, you know, Pat Lencioni is also, Pat is a great friend, and he wrote, you know, The Ideal Team Player. He talks about humble, hungry, smart, and very close. You know, he would say smart for him is like more emotional intelligence, which I would actually put probably in the hunger category. But regardless, like, we're using semantics at that point. But this mindset that, okay, I gotta make leadership somewhat simple to be able to then put into practice. And I can't have like 15 things I'm trying to navigate, you know. That's why, like, if I got three that I can focus on, it helps things get a little bit more lined up correctly.
Yeah. It's interesting, Brad, because, you know, I mean, we're in the business of building remarkable teams at Slingshot. And as we orbit leaders, Pete Richardson was actually really influential in how Slingshot expanded, you know, 14, 15 years ago. Yeah. But your book has given helpful language just to us as a team, as we've looked at potential team members to join Slingshot, because that balance of those three things is so important. Hustle has become a really big internal word for us that we've actually had to reclaim in the last few years through 2020, 2021, and 2022. I'm sure you're familiar with this, because there's been pushback with the millennial and Gen Z workforce around hustle culture, and then how that has influenced quiet quitting and that whole story. What would you say to that?
Well, I've got a lot of thoughts. Gosh, I mean, this is a whole conversation around a meal and a coffee and a follow-up coffee.
Right.
Because there's so many people that are I think, in many ways, they're scared or frightened or hesitant anymore to actually like hold people accountable, and to actually create a culture that's about hard work. And this is, I mean, the role of a leader is I think always this premise that I have to push people appropriately in order to get more out of them. Not about productivity, but about like them reaching new levels that they wouldn't necessarily go to on their own. But what you said is so true, Tim, that so many people now they're gun shy to actually like actually create a culture that feels like it's going to, when things get hard, that we're going to just shut it down. And I think that's a mistake. I really do. I don't, when I talk to young leaders, I don't know a lot of young leaders personally that mind a culture of hard work. What they want to make sure is that sense of hard work or dedication or redlining for a season actually is there's a purpose to it. It has to connect to something more than just, well, why are we doing this? Right. And to me, that's the difference. Is the old days, you and I would have just done it because we were told to.
Right.
Anymore, I think the young leader has to understand context. They have to understand the why. You have to explain more of the story behind the story in order to then connect the dots. But I would encourage leaders listening to this. We do have to focus on mental health. We do have to focus on anxiety. We do have to focus on depression and things that are true about more and more about people on our teams. But listen, there's a bunch of 24-year-olds, and I love you, 24-year-old, but you don't need a sabbatical. You've been here for like 7 minutes, and now you're asking, oh, well, listen, I need some time off, or I feel like I'm overworked. No, you're not. It's just hard. This is okay. It's like part of being part of a team. And, again, do it in context, do it in balance, but we've got to right size the ship. We got to swing the pendulum back a little bit because we're all just walking around on eggshells right now, I feel like.
Yeah, it's interesting, Brad, as a Gen Xer myself, I code switch between the boomers that I learned from and the millennials that I'm leading. And it's a really interesting space to be in. And you talk about, working on wrangling horses on a ranch and then all that you've done. And I was working 5 nights a week to earn enough money to be in ministry, piano bars and crazy stuff in Sydney, and learned so much about leadership. And then Brad, you and I have moved places, all kinds of different places for calling and for jobs, and it's cost us something, and there's been sacrifice involved. But it's a different mindset with this new workforce and these leaders that we're raising in this generation. Let's get granular for a minute. Speak to church leaders, lead pastors, executive pastors that are building teams of millennials and Gen Z leaders. What are the top things they need to be thinking about as they lead these new leaders?
Well, one of the biggest is that they probably are looking around, and they probably do have a bunch of job offers. And our job now is to coach them through that instead of be the last one to know. And this is a different mindset for a lot of us who we probably work for a boss or a leader or a manager that if they would have known that we were, on the Slingshot website or we were talking to Tim Foote about 3 other opportunities, they would have fired us.
Right.
Just so we kept it from them. We hid it, right? Because we knew, man, if they find out, it's game over. I think the new kind of leader has to be they have to be comfortable and content with the reality that the new mindset of a 20 and 30 something is more project generation. It's more gig economy. It's more free agent nation. It's not that I'm disloyal, but it is that I want to have options. And so my job now is a coach. Yeah. It's a coach to help them navigate those options. So I want to be the first one to know, Tim, if I'm the leader, if I'm that Gen X leader, the 50-year-old who's the senior pastor, I need to be the first one to know, or executive pastor. And now I'm saying to that 32-year-old, let me help you navigate this. I would love for you to stay here with us on this team. I want you to be here. I don't want you to leave, but if you do leave, I want you to go somewhere and make a decision that's going to be the right decision. Not because you're just again, things got hard, or you had a hard conversation, or you got bored last Wednesday and now you're just starting to look around. That's a massive adjustment for a lot of leaders today. it is really, really difficult to navigate. The other thing, Tim, is, and we're seeing this a lot in the corporate space, and I think it will start to show up in the church and nonprofit space, is we have to give lots of room inside of the organization for people to switch and to even like step into different seats. So this goes back to a little bit of this new mindset of short-term attention. But I also think it's a good thing if you look at your best young leaders and you look at that 25-year-old and you say, well, over the next 10 years, we probably need to give them 4 or 5 different seasons of assignment across the organization that are now going to allow them to play in different sandboxes here. Because otherwise, if we try to like only leave them in that youth pastor role for 10 years that we had for that long, they're probably not going to stick around.
Right. It's interesting, Brad. That's what one of the co-founders of Slingshot would always say to me and some of the other leaders in our organization. You won't be doing the same job in a couple of years' time. And that helped us grow within the organization. I want to pull the thread a little bit because this is a big thought. As a lead pastor or an executive pastor, being willing to always have the conversation out there and on the table that their top leaders will be getting other offers, other opportunities. How do they navigate that? These leaders listening, how do they navigate that and it not be personal?
I don't know. Good question.
Answer that for me, Brad. Answer that for us today. Because you meet with so many leaders that are dealing with this day in and day out. And we're always talking at Slingshot about taking the high road, about doing what we do with integrity, because that's our calling. And we're always advising leaders that way. But you know that the messiness of this. What would your advice be?
Well, again, I would say this: you got to lean back into it. Let's paint ourselves as older leaders and those who are in charge. Typically, you're going to be older than the leaders we're talking about on the team that do have a different mindset. And I think we have to lean back into, okay, if this was my only employee, or this was my son or daughter, how would I want their boss to treat them, their supervisor, their manager, their leader to treat them? And what we want for our kids, what we want for our best team, are the people that we feel like are the rock stars, the cream of the crop, is we want them to move into places and spaces that are going to help them thrive. Now, I hope that that's true by staying here. So I'm going to do everything in my power to keep you here. This is not just me throwing my hands up and going, well, I guess they're all going to leave. But it is me, again, shifting my mindset to say, what's best for them? What's best for them? Let's start with them in mind. What's best for them? And here's the reality, Tim. Let me go to sports analogy, because this is always helpful for me. And I'm a sports nerd, but the transfer portal in college athletics, especially in college football. I'm a big college athletics fan. The transfer portal is what we're talking about here in many ways. So no longer does any 18, 19, 20-year-old look at a university and say, this is the only option I have for 4 or 5 years. Now they're just looking at it going, this is the option I have for the first year of my career in the next 5 years of playing football. But here's what's interesting. Clemson is one example. Now, Clemson doesn't do everything right. I'm an Oklahoma fan, but Clemson had zero football players last year who entered the transfer portal from their team.
Wow.
This is one of the most, there's a lot of those players that I promise you could have considered the transfer portal. Why did no player from Clemson football enter the transfer portal? I would say because Dabo Swinney and their coaches and their administration have created such a culture at Clemson that nobody wants to leave. So it is doable for all of us who are leading to actually create a culture regardless of how many opportunities people on the team are getting and how many calls they're getting from Slingshot and, how many interviews they are saying no to, there is the possibility that culture will keep me around for way longer than probably is going to be the norm for the average 20-something.
Yeah, that's a personal analogy you use, Brad, because I have a high school wide receiver and one not far off high school. We're already getting calls from coaches, as you can imagine, and it helps if you win games too. But culture, I mean, culture is everything, and keeping those conversations out there and keeping those conversations open is so important to be aware of that. And then, we're always saying as we talk to potential leaders that the best thing to do is keep your mind open to where God wants you to be in his calling in the ministry space, but also in partner churches that we're working with. A sign of great culture is internal promotion. A sign of great culture is when you don't need us. And in fact, that's our kingdom first principle at Slingshot, is to help organizations be self-sustaining when it comes to staff. Because if we pull the focus out a little bit, Brad, I want to talk about the fact that, and you would see this, and most gatherings we're at and conferences we're at, the biggest issue for lead pastors and executive pastors is staffing. And where did all the candidates go? Where did all the leaders go? A Barna survey from May of 22 revealed that within the last year, 42% of pastors have given some serious consideration to quitting full-time ministry. And that's up 13% from January in 21. Why are leaders leaving ministry and not coming back?
Well, a lot of them should have never been in ministry. So let's just start with that. Now we could unpack that one for a while, but I think there's a lot of people that there was never a deep sense of calling into ministry. I think it was just one of those, they thought, well, I'll try this for a while.
And it got tested and revealed.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's hard. And you're not going to stick around, especially if you're navigating, like most pastors in America or globally, you're navigating the constant exhaustion. You're one of probably one or two staff members. So every hospital visit is yours. Every funeral, every wedding, every sermon. You're carrying so much that you after a while you go, well, and you don't get, you're not getting compensated high dollars for this. So I think that the testing of that over time, it's like this. I didn't really sign up for this. Here's what's interesting though, Tim. Like again, the reason I think the reason a lot of people are leaving, but also like a lot of people are staying, is because there actually is, I would say, opportunities for us to shift the paradigm in our mind of what ministry can look like. So let me give you an example. And I'm a futurist. I'm an optimist. I mean, I look at problems and I think there's got to be solutions to what we're seeing. The decline of all the things you're talking about, like pastors leaving in droves. Ministry is not necessarily it's not sticky like it once was. But here's what I would say. If you're a pastor or a leader in a small town, like most are across America, specifically, you've got to start thinking with the different mindset. So now I might need to look at 3 or 4 different churches in my small town of 10,000 people and say, how can we share staff? This is just one example. Oh, I don't care if you're Methodist. I don't care if you're Church of God. I don't care if you're Baptist. I don't care anymore. Because when times are desperate, we have to think innovatively. We have to get outside the box of what has traditionally sort of just been the answer to the question. So I've got to start thinking, how do we share staff? I've got to really, really lean into lay leadership. There's a bunch of people in our churches, even in churches of 50 or 100 people, that are waiting for you to call them to a new level of accountability, responsibility, authority, a new level of leadership. Right? So just those two things, if I start partnering with other churches on a lot of things, I mean, again, take Easter or Christmas as an example. Let's use Easter. Why aren't all 5 of these churches in Kansas City doing the exact same Easter program? Let's share resources. Let's share ideas. Nobody's going to go, well, they did that down the street at, Rehoboth Baptist. I mean, we've got to start thinking differently to navigate some of the issues that are obviously, I would say, really important, but they're solvable with different ways to look at them. Mm-hmm. And I know it's hard. I know that feels like a lot more work. I mean, Brad, come on, like you're not living in reality. Well, I actually am. Because if we don't start doing things differently, we're going to see the same trend continue to happen. And, that's we got to solve things based on a bit more of an innovative mindset. Truly, we got to get outside the box of what we've always been told or what we were taught. We got to lead differently than we were led.
Mm. Yeah, it's like a new playbook is needed. I think back at my nearly 10 years of ministry in Sydney, Australia, before coming to the US, I wouldn't have been half the leader I was when I came here if it wasn't for the tough lessons I'd learned having to innovate in a tough culture and environment to move ministry forward and to mobilize volunteers when I didn't have paid staff, all of that kind of thing. Some of my most inspiring conversations, Brad, these days are with leaders in the UK and leaders in Canada and leaders back in Australia who are talking about bivocational ministry and how do we continue to push the church forward. I think we were like the frog in the frying pan or the saucepan. It's just been boiling slowly for so long. Talk a little bit about what needs to be. I mean, you've already started. What needs to be in this new playbook?
Gosh, so many things, but I mean, definitely like we're learning across streams for sure. So I think unity. I really do. Yeah. I think unity at the local level. I mean, truly the micro. I'm talking about like small town, even neighborhoods, but unity down to that level, and then obviously unity at a macro level. It's the hardest places to find unity is locally, because everybody has a scarcity mindset. Not everybody, but you get my point on this. Like scarcity mindset is crippling us as the church, as the Big C church, because we think, well, if really, I don't want to lose that person, because most of the time it comes back to funding. It comes back to like, well, that's a donor, they're a giver in our house. And, but we still got to get, we got to get unity as the centerpiece. We have to start thinking differently and innovatively as it relates to how do we find talent? Because talent is a huge issue. It's how do we find it? How do we develop it? How do we retain it? But a lot of churches, Tim, like they've got maybe two or three people on staff at most, maybe 5. So how do I have 3 people on staff, but then have 20 people who act like they're on staff, right? And they don't get paid. Yep. And to me, that's the opportunity for a lot of churches is that spot, the 10 to 20 people, the 30 people, maybe the 50 people who are waiting on you to assign them something significant. And they will plug in. They will actually they'll lean in, and you don't have to pay them, like to me, one of the greatest opportunities for talent is the soon to retire, right? Third quarter, maybe early fourth quarter professional who has a lot of bandwidth. They typically don't need financial means. They've done okay, but they're just kind of waiting. They got lots of wisdom, And man, we're putting a lot of them on the sideline when they're ready. And so specifically that right there could be a game changer for a lot of people. Is like, go find 10 or 15 57-year-olds, right? The 61-year-olds. They have all kinds of opportunities to plug in and lead stuff way better than you can.
Yeah.
And they don't need to get paid necessarily.
And it comes down to a discipleship and formation conversation, inviting them into doing something redemptive with their life.
Yes. Beyond just, again, what feels like what's always been our pipeline, which was, well, let's, I guess maybe they can host a small group. We hope they're giving. Maybe they could, serve in some capacity once a month. Yes. And let's take that CEO of a $10 million company and let's let them run strategy for us.
Yeah.
Let's take that person who's a really good salesperson and does sales for a living, and let's let them gather the people in our house that have some financial means, and let's let them paint the vision for we need to raise $3 million for a new project. Like that's the kind of thinking we got to get in our psyche. Not that, well, gosh, I'm the only one that can do this, because that's over time that will lead to burnout. It will lead to exhaustion. It will lead to, well, I'm gonna go transition to something else because I can't do this anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. You touched on retention, development, finding talent, and you've got such a great reputation for platforming, connecting, and advocating for the next generation of young leaders. And many churches we talk to are all looking for the proven, experienced leaders, which is where the frustration is coming in because there's not as many of them around anymore, raising the bar so high that almost nobody can reach it. And we've found often you pull a leader from or a leader comes from a bigger church, bigger organization, they run the same plays at in the new context that don't work because you've got a unique playbook. We're starting to talk around the truth and reality that leaders are actually built, not bought. And so they're developed. That true match and true connection comes in the first couple of years of employment. I mean, would anybody have hired a young Brad Lomenick or a young Tim Foote? Maybe, maybe not. What would you say to that concept of the development that has to happen and essentially finding the draft pick and knowing that, hey, we need to grow this leader up in our culture and our system, so to speak?
I think that what you're talking about, the leadership pipeline, is perhaps the stopgap. Now, again, some would say immediately, well, Brad, I don't have a leadership pipeline. We got nobody in our pipeline. We believe a pipeline is important, but we just don't have anybody in it. Well, start somewhere. I mean, have you got any kids? You got any kids in the kids ministry? I mean, start at 5th grade. That now all of a sudden your mindset is that we're gonna develop leaders, and hopefully they'll stay here. I mean, Church of the Highlands is one good example that nobody's sitting around Church of the Highlands right now having a talent recruitment conversation.
Yeah.
They've got 1,000 kids in Highlands College.
Right.
Now, you don't think they get the cream of the crop to then stick around and be part of the staff at Highlands. Now they're creating graduates that then other churches can have access to, but that was a pipeline decision by Chris Hodges and their leadership team many years ago to say, we're gonna start to develop a culture and a framework here that says we develop leaders. But everybody can do this. Again, I don't care if you're a church of 50 or 5,000 or 50,000. You can have a mindset of leadership development, pipeline. And here's the good news. The whole mindset of, well, can an 18-year-old stick around and actually intern and be a resident as part of our staff. Absolutely. While also going to college, while also getting their degree, through all the different ways now that they can do that through learning, online, digitally. There's a lot of universities now that offer like the ability for somebody to actually be on staff at a church, and to get their college degree by being part of the college that's at that church. I mean, a lot of things have changed in this space. So, but we've got to start early. This is what you just said, Tim. We're building leaders from the ground up. We're not necessarily going and cherry picking leaders from other places.
You talk about change a lot and thinking differently a lot, and you can't innovate, Brad, obviously, without change. You say in your book, I'm going to quote you now from H3 Leadership, innovation is the opposite of average. It is refusing to coast, rejecting the status quo, and having the courage to shake up the meaningless routines that lead to laziness. Innovation is the act of exploring new ideas, and every leader must develop this habit in his own life if he wants to become a change maker. What are the greatest opportunities for innovation right now that you believe are getting overlooked?
Wow. I mean, specifically for pastors or just leaders in general?
I think let's start with church leaders right now.
Yeah. Well, I do think the unity thing is for sure. I mean, I think we, when it comes to best practices, there's a lot of sharing. We live in a culture of open source.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the church is closed source for the most part. It's hundreds of thousands of churches, again, trying to navigate what are we doing right here in our little sandbox with, putting our sermons online, or what series are we doing, or, we can't copy anybody else. And I just think it's almost arrogant is what it is to me. Because I promise you, there's people from Google and Amazon and Facebook and name any other, Salesforce, eBay. I mean, name any other tech company. I promise you, they're on some shared text string going, hey, what are you guys doing over there? Right. I mean, and reality is this, that they know that the way to, I mean, when Amazon Web Services decided they were going to be, the platform by which every other company could sort of store data. Like, you don't think Microsoft and Amazon and Google and Apple all work together in certain areas, even though they're kind of fighting each other in the advertising space. So I think that's such an overlooked opportunity. And again, it's easy for me to say. I know it's hard to do. The question is always, who will do it in your local community? Like, who's the one that's going to be willing to sort of cross the bridge and say, hey guys, like, why don't we get together and share some thoughts? Why don't we actually get together and let's share the creative genius that, is coming out of our creative team for this next sermon series. So, in regards to leaders in general, and this, I think this one's going to hit, Tim. I would love to hear your input on this one. I know this, I'll start with this example. In the movie world, forever, there has been a mindset that when a movie is created, there is a studio that brings together a director and an executive producer and actors and the director of photography and cinematographers and all the people. Okay. None of those people work for that studio. They're all 1099 or they're all sort of free agents, but nobody cares. Like, we don't go to a film and a movie and go, well, do they all work for that studio? I think the future in many ways of the workforce, of the way we're going to get stuff done, is that we're going to become our own economy, right? Our sort of our own LLC in essence. and we're going to farm out our talent to multiple different organizations. Now, I don't know what that's going to mean, again, for ministries and nonprofits, but it might mean this, that 5 to 10 years from now, there's, a staff of 100 right now of a church or a nonprofit or a company. 5 or 10 years from now might be a staff of 50. And they might have another 100 people that are contractors or they're free agents. They sort of like plug in, and figuring that out is going to be a huge part of the leader's responsibility, their job description going forward. And it's already happening. I mean, everybody's like, well, Brad, is that wrong or right? I don't know. It just is. It's just the new reality of a 20-something looking at me going, I don't want to work full time for somebody. Yeah. I want to have 5 different projects that I'm working on. And so we have to be really, really bullish on starting to navigate, well, what does that mean from a team perspective? How do you build culture in that kind of environment? How do we actually get people to feel like they're part of our of the framework of this house or this nonprofit, this movement, even though they don't really show up and have a full-time job here.
Yeah. We've learned that personally, Brad, at Slingshot, being virtual all around the country. Some are full-time and some are better off not full-time and actually serve our partners better that way because of what they bring to the table. But I think the key is the ratio that you talked about. A church team might be 30, maybe they're 15, but then they have remote workers and they have 1099s. It's a big shift. I think we started the shift and got catapulted down the road in 2020 and 2021. And then we kind of rushed back to what we felt was safe. Yeah. And we're trying to push forward those innovative conversations about how we open up again to a different playbook and work out, okay, how do we utilize these young leaders who actually don't do well in an office? And what does that look like? And how do we join together? I'm still connected at my local church that I moved to the US for 21 years ago. Now I get to run Slingshot, but I still get my fingers in the dirt of local church ministry. I got a totally different view now that I serve hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of churches when I'm talking with my local church. I think it's a different shift in mindset and such an important shift in mindset.
Yeah. Well, one other thing I would say is especially for churches, for pastors, how do we stand out in our community? How do we innovate? And the question of, well, are people showing up less and less? Probably. So my theory and my advice then is, well, then our job is to show up more, meaning that we have to show up in the community. And going forward, it's less about, hey, Sunday's here and our doors are open. And it's more about, hey, Monday through Friday is here and we're out making things happen. And this has to be, again, the new reality that we're going to go out and be intentional about moving into the community compared to we're just sort of opening our doors and waiting on people to show up again. And it's a different mindset. It's much more that our job is now to see ourselves as really, in some ways, as community development officers. And this is gonna force us to work with people that we don't agree with. It's gonna push us into places that are messy. But I think that's again where the opportunity is for so many pastors. Because listen, we all know this is true. When a disaster strikes a community, a town, a city, the people who have the most influence are the ones who've been showing up the longest, right, and serving without fanfare. And that's where the church that's where we should shine, right? So, everybody's having this constant conversation of, are people coming back? Are people coming back? Well, probably not. But I promise you, there is more opportunity than you'll ever be able to respond to of needs in the community that now you can show up and serve and lead on. And this is, there's lots of examples of churches that are doing this really well, and they have like really quiet but incredibly influential access to the highest levels of power and decision making in these cities. And everybody goes, well, why? Why do they have so much access? Because they've been showing up and serving. And I think that's going to be a big part of our role going forward as the church in the future.
We get a front row seat, Brad, to see a beautiful new expression of the church and a beautiful new expression of team. And we got to cross that bridge like you talked about earlier and continue to show up. And I'm going to bring us full circle here. It might feel like wrangling horses some days, right, Brad? But
especially the troublemakers, the wrangling the troublemaking horses.
But they're often the brilliant ones, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Again, that's another episode about the lessons you learned wrangling horses about leaders and teams. Tell us real quick as we close about your podcast and curating content right now and what you're loving about that in this season.
Well, I mean, I'm doing some guest interviews on mine on a regular basis, and I also just try to provide some links and recommendations and resources. The curating the best for leaders to stay in the know. That's kind of the subtitle or the theme of my podcast. And, it's a great way for me to provide recommendations on podcasts to listen to, or books that I've come across, or new voices, or I love being the curator, and it forces me to actually do it, Tim. Having a podcast on a weekly basis then forces me to go find those links. So H3 Leadership Podcast.
Thank you for doing that. Thank you for curating material and inspiration and all that you do, and for gathering people and investing in leaders. What's the best way listeners can follow along with you and what you're doing?
Yeah, h3leadership.com or bradlomenick.com. You can follow me on social media at Brad Lomenick. I'm not a great follow. I don't post a lot. I'm listening a lot, but I don't necessarily do a lot of posting.
Well, mate, I've so enjoyed this conversation. I hope we can talk again soon. And thank you for all you do. And thanks for being with us today.
I loved it, man. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening today. There was so much in that conversation that challenged me personally in how I think about how I lead teams and the future of the church. We need to keep change and innovation at the forefront. If you enjoyed this conversation today, please subscribe or leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you choose to listen to your podcast, and share it with another leader. In the meantime, stay curious and reach for the remarkable.